Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alex. I'm from Billups, as you can see from the slightly younger photo of me. Today we have Jacq with us and Eoin, who haven't sat where they need to based on the presentation. No, I'm only joking. We're going to go into this today. We've got hard stop at 2:30, so we'll try and keep the answers useful, but also not too long. So the first question, I'll start off with you, Jacq, and then we'll go over to you, Eoin. What is the purpose of your brand versus how do you then activate that via different marketing campaigns or bits of activity?
Okay, so hi, I'm Jacq. I'm from Pip and Nut. We are a natural nut butter and snacks brand. We have been going for about 10 years now, and we are now the #1 natural nut butter brand, and we're the #2. We're experiencing about 50% year-on-year growth at the moment. So, and we were founded basically based on Pip, who is our founder, going into the category and finding that there was lots of health food, boring brands on the shelf, or alternatively, there were brands that were stuffed full of palm oil and sugar and lots of unnecessary unnatural ingredients. So she set upon to kind of challenge the category and launched Pip and Nut. And we've most recently moved into confectionery, partnering with Tony's Open Chain. We use their chocolate in our nut butter cups. So we're very much the anti-Reese's peanut butter cups and bars as well, cereal bars, in case you haven't tried them or seen them. They're called stuffed oat bars. And I guess we activate our campaigns based on what the consumer wants. So we are very much like a taste-led brand, but taste-led and not at the detriment of health or planet. But we definitely lead with taste and on our kind of more mainstream paid comms, because that is the #1 thing that consumers are most interested in. But we clearly have a health agenda and an environmental and social agenda because we're a B Corp certified business. Pip has never used palm oil in any of the products, and we continue to have that ethos. So we tend to use more owned and earned channels to kind of talk about the more kind of health and environmental impact of our brand.
Over to you, Eoin.
Hi, well, a bit loud. I'm Eoin. I'm founder of Goodrays. We're the UK's most premium functional drinks brand. We started about 5 years ago, so half the lifespan. So credit to you for sticking at it for so long. We are stocked in Tesco, Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, all the major retailers. We're at about 10,000 distribution points, and kind of similar growth journey. We've been on that triple-digit growth for the last 4 years now, which is both exciting and exhausting in equal measure. But it all goes back really to starting with purpose, and I think like purpose in general can be anything really that solves a consumer problem. I think that could be everything from taste to price. Like, I think we had a fairly narrow definition of what purpose used to be. I think it's basically, are you addressing something that the consumer is facing? For us, it was really about mental well-being. I think there's a stress pandemic basically in the UK. 64% of people in the UK now feel intense stress on a weekly basis, which is higher than ever before. It's actually doubled in the last 6 years, which is crazy. And there's a trade problem as well, right? Like, are we actually meeting that as a food and drink industry? I think you look at the last 30, 40, 50 years of food and drink, we've been really bad at addressing mental well-being in the supermarkets. Things have been ultra-processed food, high sugar, cheaper booze, high caffeine. We've let energy drinks and sugar drinks own the market. So what in the supermarket actually makes you feel better on a day-to-day basis? And that's our purpose, is like, can we make you feel better? Can we add benefit? And I think, so it's all about mental well-being, really. That's the purpose. That's why I started using CBD and got into it. Then when you think about, like, how do you activate that? I think that kind of initial purpose guides it. Your channel strategy, your tactics change, but that purpose always underpins it. And that can be easier said than done, because how do you create mental well-being and content that makes people feel calm and comfortable on digital platforms when everything is chaotic and rapid and trying to sell, and it's a brain rot. But it also gives you a space, I think, when you have that purpose to differentiate, so you can create more well-being content. For us, it's all about the great outdoors. Like, that's what we realize our consumers are really interested in. That's where they find mental well-being. That's my background. So we launched something called One for the Outdoors, which is basically 1% of all of our turnover goes on helping people access the great outdoors, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, because 54% of the people in the UK don't have access to green space. So I think that purpose underpins that mission. And then as you scale, it's about really, are you amplifying that message in the right way?
Okay. We're going to move on to the second question. This one's slightly shorter, still as important. Where is the purpose of sustainability in your business? And what does that purpose mean to you, I guess, from a sustainability point of view? I could start with you, Eoin. We'll flip it.
Yeah, we talked about this briefly yesterday, actually, and I think it's quite interesting because, you know, when we used to talk about purpose, everything was about sustainability, but purpose is much wider than that. It should be about your people, planet, how you use your profits, etc. Like sustainability, I don't really qualify as corporate social governance or responsibilities or anything like that. I think that just underpins any business that you do have. I think if you start a brand now in 2025, sustainability has to be part of it. I think also like you have to now be really transparent about where you are and where you're going, because consumers are particularly cynical to greenwashing, probably more than ever before. So it's about what are you doing now? Like for us, instance, it's, you know, we're the first people in the functional drinks category to have fully recyclable cans. You know, we are on a mission to reduce plastic from our supply chain. We use hemp fibers that were used in the CBD production for merchandise, for T-shirts, etc. And the long-term goal is to create a sustainable loop whereby we use hemp for carbon sequestering, because it's 10 times more effective at sequestering carbon than trees, which I doubt anyone would know, because why would you?
I didn't know that, no.
It's also brilliant at binding soil as well, so it's great for fallow land. Using that CBD obviously in our products, but then using all the actual fibers for merchandising, for marketing, etc., for packaging as well. So that's where we want to go, but I think you have to be transparent about where you are at and build towards a better future.
Especially after 5 years. Over to you, Jacq.
Yeah, I think like Eoin said, purpose-led kind of marketing has had quite a bad rap recently. And I think certainly it reached its peak, didn't it, during COVID, when you felt like your whole social or LinkedIn feed was full of kind of purpose, kind of more traditional purpose-led communications. So we've always been consistently focused on taste as our kind of lead message. But in terms of the part that sustainability plays, it's fundamental. It was right at the beginning. The no palm oil piece has always existed and will continue to always exist. We have a big sustainability agenda. We're B Corp certified, but over the years we have tried to perhaps go too large or lean into what we're hearing on in the social landscape about what's important to consumers. So, for example, plastic packaging was something that we were working on about 3 or 4 years ago. But actually, when we then did our carbon footprint, the most important thing for us wasn't plastic packaging. That was a tiny, tiny part of our footprint. It was actually all about the nuts, unsurprisingly, because that is the majority of our ingredients. So we are really, really focused on driving a sustainability agenda with our nuts. So we're part of a big regenerative agricultural initiative. And how much we talk about that is relatively limited, I'd say, from a consumer point of view. You know, it's all about product first and impact as a kind of supporting element of it, because people in the main want to try your product and engage with your brand because it's doing something for them first and foremost. And in our instance, that taste. In Eoin's instance, that's mental health. So, you know, that's the primary, and we never lose sight of that. But at the same time, we do use our owned and earned channels to talk about some of the sustainability elements of the brand, because we know that that is still a motivation for people, but it's not the primary motivation.
And I think as well with like sustainability topics as well, and if like particularly if you're in something like mental well-being, like, these are quite serious purpose-led brands, and you can risk being really boring, like being uninteresting, boring, a bit serious, a bit too woke, and ultimately like you are a treat. Like people buy us to find joy because it's still a soft drink, it's still a snack bar. You still also have to have a level of humor and fun as well to balance out that purpose-led bit, just so you're actually having that emotional impact on the consumer.
Okay, interesting. So it's more of a standard as a basic, and then you've got to build on that, but not necessarily in every single campaign.
But you've got to make sure if you're gonna talk about it, have it as an authentic foundation, and it has to thread through your whole business, and your employees have to be right behind it because they're your biggest brand advocates. You know, it's kind of, you can't get away with just doing a few like token initiatives, and it's because it's just not the right thing to do. So, and then try and talk about it to consumers because they're just all over it and they're just not, it's not going to wash.
Okay. I think this is quite a hard question, but I'm quite curious by the response in the fact that in a world of, a lot of purpose-led brands, purpose-led campaigns, which we discussed earlier briefly, how do you guys stand out? Because you're in an incredibly competitive environment. Obviously, the soft drink environment is very competitive. Similar with you, Jacq. It's very hard to do that at a campaign level or even a brand level. So I'll start with you, Jacq. How do you feel that you manage to stand out in quite a difficult world?
I think it's just building on what Eoin said, which is the personality of the brand. So we have the solid foundation. So product does and is king. You will not survive anything if you do not have a really great product. So we start with that as a kind of foundation, but the personality of the brand has existed since day one, and that is the kind of consistency as well of who we are. And the squirrel, which is part of our logo, is an asset that we use, and we use it in our above the line campaigns. We use it in our impact report. We use it in-house as defining the energy in the room. We call it squirrel energy. It kind of infiltrates our values in the business. It infiltrates our tone of voice. We'll be sat in a meeting and we'll be like, is that what a squirrel would say? We're like critiquing some of the tone of voice and the copy. We're like, is that what a squirrel would say? So it's kind of bringing that personality, which enables us to kind of stand out. And certainly in the category when we arrived, all the packaging that was in the natural space was very beige and green and brown, and we really disrupted that with our kind of bright, bold, white packaging and kind of those kind of bold colours that we have as part of the brand DNA.
Okay, over to you, Eoin.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Like, you always start with product. Like, if you think about any of the great brands that you really love and you buy and you're loyal to, they're all underpinned by great products that are superior to what is in the market. And when I think you go about building a solution to a consumer problem, you don't really start with brand. You probably start with product first. Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to differentiate against what's in the market, you start at the product level. So I think your product has to be genuinely different and better. For us, we use science-backed CBD doses, which no one else in the market uses. We use all natural ingredients, no artificial flavors. Thanks for the advertising. And then I think you're building on a differentiated brand on top of that as well, where you can resonate with the consumer. But I think it starts with product and get matches up with the brand.
Okay, interesting. So product first, I think, is the overall though, which is great. I guess. Look, you're both scaling. Obviously, Eoin, you're going through great growth at the moment. Jacq, still doing really, really well. How do you then align internal teams and external creative partners around that consistent brand voice and purpose? Because there are some brands that you don't need to put the logo up. You can put a couple of things up and bang, that's Specsavers or that's KFC. Yeah. You can tell what I like to eat. And it's how do you guys then become that next person where, for example, with your iconic branding, but how do you make sure that we never, ever test and go away from, no, we always have, the squirrel central?
Yeah. I'd say we have been relatively consistent or refreshingly consistent. So we are always kind of reviewing all of our assets, but we did an exercise about a year and a half ago, which was, I would say, pretty critical, where we'd always had brand guidelines, but we hadn't really ever clearly defined our tone of voice. And so we worked with a tone of voice agency, and that was really, really helpful. And also just did the whole kind of like, let's get all the assets out and rank them and test them with consumers. And so we've now got a very strict set of brand codes and guidelines and tone of voice. And so whilst there are some fine nuances, but tactical nuances, depending on the consumer when we go into new markets. So, for example, we just recently entered into Belgium. We will adapt to a certain extent, but most of it is relatively consistent, and that enables the whole team. And they're all trained up on our tone of voice as well. So we gave them all training so that whether they're speaking to a buyer or someone's emailing the factory, there's an element of kind of the Pip and Nut tone of voice that comes through every touch point.
I didn't know that existed, but now I do, so that's quite exciting. Over to you, Eoin.
Yeah, I think same thing is like consistency of message from the beginning. Like, I always think that we got aligned 5 years ago on what we call our North Star, which is about helping people improve their mental well-being, which is pretty simple, pretty easy to stick to. Like, underneath that, things will change, strategies, tactics, even team, consumer type might change. But that having a really clear North Star that you can align your whole team on, I think is massively important, because you get a consistency through the message, through the work that you're doing, but also through the culture. And I think bringing on the people that actually mirror that mission as well, whether that's internal team or external partners, agencies, like, we look for people who really understand the consumer problem, who are part of the consumer demographic that we're going after, so that we can actually align all the teams.
And the whole compound consistency and the creativity, that System One work that is, I don't know if everybody knows about System One, they're a fantastic research agency, and they test that kind of the compound effect of consistency, and it's absolutely there in black and white that if you continue to do things consistently, it will pay back. And I think we are starting to see the benefits of that at Pip and Nut for sure.
Yeah, and I actually think you talked about like consistency and maintaining brand personality as you scale. I actually think you should get more consistent as you scale. I think early days you are a little bit more experimental, testing and learning what works, and then you should really know your consumer, know your category, stick to your mission, and then it's about amplifying that and scaling.
Okay, second last question. I'm going to start with you, Eoin. So the question is, what role does storytelling play in maintaining brand personality at scale? And then how do you make sure this evolves with your audience without diluting your identity? Because you've got a very clear mission. Your company is, going after that. How do you make sure that when you are putting that storytelling into play, that it isn't diluted, that as your audience evolves, it remains, perfect?
Yeah, I think it's really understanding the consumer, spending a lot of time with the consumer as well, understanding what they're looking for, that your story is resonating with them. Like, ultimately, it's a little bit easy for me to say and be consistent, because the story of Goodrays, like the consumer problem, like, that is my story. Like, I struggled with anxiety and stress and sleep issues. Like, that's why I used CBD back in 2014 when it was illegal. Like, so I was a guinea pig. I knew that it worked on me. So having that level of like understanding and resonance with the consumer makes it quite easy for me to apply that consistency with the team, and then matching that by having the team who align with that mission and are part of that culture has made it a lot easier. So I think ultimately storytelling is like what you should be doing as a brand, because that's how people connect emotionally with the brand. And we ultimately, like, I know we talked about getting product right first earlier, but if you want to scale brand, you are ultimately trying to get people to buy in at an emotional level to the brand. So we're not selling product, we're selling feeling, we're selling emotion, we're selling lifestyle. Like, that's the true scalability, particularly within soft drinks, which is ultimately the most competitive landscape in the supermarket. And I actually think that in soft drinks in the UK are particularly bad at having ambition about being lifestyle brands and really going for it. So I think you got to get that story right. It helps if you're close to it from the beginning. They say start a business in something that you really care about and are really close to, and then the rest should take care of itself.
I mean, yeah, you're solving a problem that you're very aware of and it's working, so you're close to it. And over to you, Jacq.
Yeah, I think you just tell the appropriate stories in the appropriate channels at the appropriate time, and I think like the storytelling that we use, for example, on LinkedIn is through recipes and food, and and that's there are some interjections of like what we're doing from a kind of team point of view and a product launch point of view, but in the main, we want people to fall in love with nuts as much as we do. So, if they can use those products in their day-to-day recipes or breakfasts, and that's kind of how we kind of communicate our story in that environment. And then Pip is, a phenomenal storyteller. She's the founder. She's got that authentic starting point like Eoin, and, LinkedIn is a great channel for her to talk about. The reasons why she set up the business and tell the relevant stories through that channel as well. So, I think it's just all about picking the right channels for the right stories for what the consumer wants at that point in time.
And I think as well, it depends on what market you're going to, like understanding the cultural nuances within different markets. Like, the soft drinks trends and food and drink trends tend to come from the UK and US. We have the most innovation in the world, but they're actually massively different markets. And you talked about product versus brand earlier. Like in the UK, I think we're particularly cynical about just brand plays. Like if you look at Prime or you look at Liquid Death, they didn't have nearly the same scalability that you did in the US, where you can stick Dwayne Johnson's face on a tequila brand and it's going to sell, a couple billion. Like it is literally a cheat code in the US, but here we're much too cynical about that. So we much prefer to look into sustainability or brand equity. We don't really buy into celebrity partnerships. Like one of our competitors was a Kim Kardashian bubblegum soda. Like they took our space in supermarkets. It didn't make any sense. Like what was the consumer problem that they were addressing? But it didn't work. It was gone within 12 months because there's a massive difference between the UK consumer and the US consumer. So I think you can still have the same mission, but you have to think about how you amplify and scale those brands in different geographies because there's massively different cultural nuances as well.
I think the point there is around scaling and how much harder it becomes. Obviously, with everything we mentioned today, it's probably a lot easier when you're a founder or when you're starting up with Pip. But then when everything scales, things get really difficult because you do have to put those processes in. You have to do more of the boring stuff.
Yeah, it is also a lot harder when you're not scaling, though. Like growing is hard, declining is a lot worse.
Well, luckily you are doing really well this year, and hopefully it continues. Same with you, Jacq. That is all of the questions for today. So thank you very much, everyone.